Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, ironclad relationship between Iran and China. Not exactly. Iran turned back two Chinese container ships trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz, even though a top Chinese official tried to secure safe passage. China's top chip maker under scrutiny. U.S. officials say it has been supplying semiconductor equipment to Iran's military for about a year, despite existing sanctions. Escalating tensions ahead of President Trump's China visit, Beijing launching investigations into U.S. trade practices. More on how this is targeting Washington's move to resume some tariffs on China. Old fighter jets converted into attack drones now deployed near Taiwan by Beijing. What could it mean for future tensions over the island? And a new book about the forced organ harvesting in China climbing the New York Times bestseller list. Killed to Order by Jan Jekielek, senior editor at the Epoch Times, raising major questions about the Chinese Communist Party.
We estimate it's about a $9 billion annual industry, 60 to 90,000 transplants per year. That's the scale.
Is Iran's relationship with China ironclad, as Iran once claimed? Not necessarily. Two Chinese container ships forced to turn around in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Now, a growing crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is not only disrupting global trade, it's also exposing the limits of Beijing's influence in the Middle East. Despite its diplomatic efforts, China is struggling to secure safe passage, and the effects are starting to hit its manufacturing sector back home. Ship tracker Marine Traffic said the two Chinese vessels were turned away near Iran on Friday after Tehran restricted traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says only ships carrying goods into the country, like household essentials, cars, and pharmaceuticals, can pass, effectively shutting out many foreign vessels. According to Epoch Times insider sources, Beijing has been trying to intervene. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has reportedly pushed Iran to guarantee safe passage for Chinese shipping. But so far, those efforts have fallen short. Instead, Iran says it will only guarantee some cargo gets through, adding pressure on Beijing as it weighs how far it's willing to go to protect its trade. The impact is already being felt. In southern China, manufacturers are seeing delays and cancellations as shipping routes grow more uncertain. Some factories are slowing or even halting production altogether, with thousands of containers stranded. Analysts say what Beijing once saw as a geopolitical opportunity is quickly becoming an economic strain that could ripple across its export-driven economy. China's top chipmaker is now under scrutiny for supplying Iran's military. SMIC, Beijing's largest chipmaker, has been providing semiconductor equipment to Iran's military for about a year. That's according to two senior U.S. officials on Thursday. They add it's still going on, and that it may also include training on semiconductor production. The officials say the tools are being used by Iran's defense industry and could support a wide range of electronic systems. SMIC is already under U.S. sanctions over alleged ties to Beijing's military. The development comes as Washington continues to restrict China's access to advanced chip-making equipment from U.S. suppliers. China is pushing back against U.S. moves that could lead to higher tariffs on Chinese goods. The tit for tat comes less than 2 months ahead of President Trump's planned visit to Beijing. China's Commerce Ministry on Friday launched 2 investigations into U.S. trade practices. Worth noting, the investigations target U.S. trade probes into alleged unfair practices from other countries, including China. Washington launched the investigations after the Supreme Court struck down U.S. tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. If the investigation finds that these countries engaged in unfair trade practices, the U.S. could resume certain tariffs on Chinese goods. China's Commerce Ministry says it firmly opposes the U.S. trade investigation. The Chinese probe accuses the U.S. of disrupting global supply chains and imposing trade barriers on green products. The U.S. and China have maintained a trade truce since last fall. The U.S. lowered tariffs on Chinese goods. In exchange, China eased export controls on rare earth minerals and began cracking down on fentanyl precursors. Earlier this month, Washington signaled to Beijing by sending a U.S. Navy aircraft through the Taiwan Strait in international airspace. The Taiwan Strait separates Taiwan from mainland China. The move comes amid growing concerns that U.S.-Israel strikes could deplete munitions the U.S. might need in the event of a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan is just one of many unresolved issues between the two superpowers. Other points of tension include tariffs, fentanyl, rare earth exports, and China's purchases of U.S. soybeans. China has deployed old fighter jets now converted into attack drones near the Taiwan Strait. That's according to a new report by the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Satellite images from February show rows of small swept-wing aircraft. They closely resemble the Shenyang J-6, a jet first flown in the 1960s. The report is part of the China Air Power Tracker. It identifies these drone aircraft at 6 air bases, all of them near Taiwan. Researchers estimate more than 200 of these converted jets have been deployed. J. Michael Dom, a senior fellow at the Institute, says these old fighter jets converted into drones would function more like cruise missiles. They could be used in the opening phase of an attack on Taiwan. And given the large numbers, they could overwhelm air defenses, with potential targets including Taiwan, U.S., or allied forces. A senior Taiwanese security official pointed out a cost issue. If Beijing launches these drones like missiles to attack Taiwan, the island would have to use expensive interceptors to stop them. Taiwan's defense ministry is now trying to acquire a new generation of counter-drone systems. Beijing views Taiwan as its own territory and has never renounced the use of force to bring the island under its control. Taiwan rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims, saying only the island's people can decide their future. A new book exposing the Chinese Communist Party's practice of forced organ harvesting has hit the New York Times bestseller list. Epoch Times senior editor Jan Jekielek is the author of the book, titled Killed to Order: China's Organ Harvesting Industry and the True Nature of America's Biggest Adversary. Here's more.
We estimate it's about a $9 billion annual industry, 60 to 90,000 transplants per year. That's the scale.
The new book, Killed to Order, appeared at number 8 on the New York Times hardcover nonfiction bestseller list this week. It covers 20 years of investigations into the CCP's forced organ harvesting from religious believers and prisoners of conscience. During a recent launch event, author Jan Jekielek said that while organs in the U.S. are difficult to match and the patient could be waiting for a transplant for years, in China, one could obtain an organ in just weeks.
Basically, if you are wealthy and you have the money to pay, the moment that you pay that money to the broker, okay, in China, that person, the so-called donor, is pre-matched to you in the database already. And you go, and that person is shipped and killed to order. That's why it's called Killed to Order.
Jekielek explains that the number of organ transplants in China began exploding in the early 2000s, in a country with no organ donation system. This happened soon after the CCP launched a violent persecution of Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation practice rooted in the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance.
It meant put them through this re-education process, brainwash them, break them, right? There's a whole part of the incarceration system that was called re-education through labor camps. If you can imagine, they had perfected this, but the Falun Gong were really resilient to it. So they incarcerated them, okay, in these massive numbers, maybe 1 million, maybe 2, we don't know. And then they started blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning them. Some very evil person figured out that there's this priority to, quote unquote, eradicate Falun Gong on one side and an interest in growing their organ industry on the other.
The first half of the book exposes the scale of the CCP's forced organ harvesting system and how it works. The second half explains how the CCP made the West complicit over the past 3 decades.
We actually train, not the administration, but we train Chinese transplant doctors, surgeons. We provide materials, we provide funding, there's NIH funding.
Jekielek adds that the CCP has an elite longevity project called Project 981, which aims to extend the lifespan of top party leaders to 150 years. He says the book sheds a light on how the CCP treats human beings as mere body parts, a concept he refers to as instrumentalization in his book.
Human beings being used as just material for profit and elite longevity, right? The 2/3 of the book, in fact, right, is actually about how this industry is a lens into understanding how communist China actually works. right? And this instrumentalization is the perfect word for explaining literally how they treat anything, how they treat people, bodies, how they treat trade partners.
Multiple states, as well as Congress, have passed bills combating the CCP's forced organ harvesting. Jekielek says he hopes his book will help millions of more people to understand forced organ harvesting and end this crime against humanity.
2 people are now indicted after an improvised explosive device was found outside a Florida Air Force base. Authorities say one suspect planted the device days earlier before fleeing the country to China. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
FBI Director Kash Patel says a brother and sister have now been indicted after an explosive device was discovered outside a gate at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. Federal prosecutors say 20-year-old Alan Zhang planted an improvised explosive device outside the base's visitor center on March 10th. Prosecutors say he planted the device days before it was discovered, then fled the country. Officials say the device didn't detonate and a 911 call reporting a bomb did not include a location. Days later, the base security located the device. The FBI confirmed it was an IED and safely removed it. Investigators say Zhang and his sister, 27-year-old Anne Mary Zhang, quickly made plans to flee, buying tickets to China and selling the Mercedes-Benz SUV that was allegedly used to transport the device. Authorities later traced the 911 call using cell data and surveillance video from Best Buy, where the phone was purchased, linking it back to Zhang. Officials also said a search of Zhang's home uncovered components consistent with the explosive device. Anne Mary Zhang has since returned to the U.S. and is now in custody, charged with accessory after the fact and evidence tampering, and could face up to 30 years in prison. Her brother remains overseas and faces up to 40 years in prison if convicted. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, Beijing's long arm in America's top universities under scrutiny. Lawmakers say Chinese agents are operating on U.S. campuses, intimidating American students. A Stanford student testifies. And how are China and Russia weaponizing the information collected from our smartphones? A cybersecurity expert exposes what's at stake.
They're getting the information either directly or indirectly from these ad tech wars to hunt people down.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. America's top universities are global leaders in research, but there are growing concerns that the Chinese regime is exploiting their openness from within. House lawmakers on the Education and Workforce Committee exposing how Chinese agents are surveilling and intimidating American college students. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
United States universities are among the most powerful research engines in the world, but lawmakers warn that that influence has also made them a target. On Capitol Hill, growing concerns that the Chinese Communist Party is using campuses as a battleground.
This fall, the FBI informed me that I'm being physically monitored on Stanford's campus by agents of the CCP, and that my family is also being watched.
At Stanford University, student journalist Elsa Johnson says she experienced that firsthand. Johnson says she was approached by a man posing as a student suspected to be linked to the CCP.
The FBI confirmed he had no affiliation with Stanford. He was likely operating on behalf of China's Ministry of State Security. I was one of at least 10 female students he targeted since 2020.
After publishing her investigation into Chinese influence, she says the intimidation only escalated.
I began receiving intimidation calls where callers would switch to Mandarin. And in one case, the caller referenced my mother. I have also received threatening scam emails attempting to convince me to take down my reporting on this issue.
She also points to student groups that are connected to the CCP that pressure and monitor Chinese students on campus.
The Association of Chinese Students and Scholars has been used for peer monitoring and reporting back to the Chinese Communist Party, which I think creates an unsafe environment for a lot of Chinese students. Their families are often threatened if they don't cooperate.
A spokesperson from Stanford tells NTD that it takes foreign influence threats seriously, and it's working closely with law enforcement to protect students and research integrity. Now, officials say that these incidents aren't isolated. At the University of Michigan, 2 Chinese nationals face charges for allegedly smuggling illegal biological materials into the U.S.
We acted swiftly and decisively, working with federal law enforcement, promptly terminating student work visas and severing all ties with those individuals.
And a former researcher at the University of Florida was indicted for fraud, accused of secretly funneling taxpayer-funded research to China. Others at the university have also been flagged for undisclosed CCP ties.
We had some examples of significant breaches of trust at the university, and we were committed to cooperating fully, and those employees are no longer at the institution.
Now, Congress has passed legislation to increase transparency on foreign funding, but officials warn that the threat is ongoing and evolving. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
A major step towards reducing U.S. reliance on China for rare earth minerals. American mining company Energy Fuels has produced a rare earth mineral domestically for the first time in decades. The company announced earlier this week that it successfully produced its first kilogram of terbium oxide using one source within the United States. It marks the first time in decades that a U.S. company has produced this material on American soil. CEO Mark Chalmers says the achievement will provide a reliable source for magnets used in electric vehicles, drones, and defense technologies. The mill is expected to continue producing about a kilogram of terbium oxide each week. China currently controls nearly all global production of terbium oxide and similar rare earths. The announcement comes as the Trump administration pushes to secure a domestic rare earth supply chain. When targeted ads pop up across devices, is that just a cash grab by big tech, or are there more dire concerns? Cybersecurity advisor at MySmartPrivacy, Rex Lee, joins us to unpack how China and Russia are taking advantage of this to track people in real time and how it could be weaponized in times of war. Rex Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show, Tiffany.
Diving right on in, how has surveillance capitalism evolved beyond, say, the commercial aspects?
There's a civil-military fusion program involving Palantir Technologies, and we've been hearing their executives on how they've been able to weaponize information collected from smartphones and other sources, computers and so forth, to be able to track down and hunt targets, even conduct espionage and so forth. This was also done through the Israeli cameras to track the mullahs and Khomeini prior to the strikes. And if you remember Midnight Hammer, almost a year ago when we went in and attacked the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, if you remember, the leadership of the nuclear power plants were eliminated in their apartments. So people were wondering, well, how is this happening? How did they know where they lived? How is this happening? Well, what we're seeing is a convergence of military uses for this technology other than targeted advertising, which becomes a threat to everybody connected to the internet by way of Android, iOS, and Windows.
I want to dig into that. So I think you already touched on the infrastructure part, but so that part is everyone's smartphones, and then if they have the apps, how exactly does this work into the civil military part?
Well, as you know, we've done a lot of reports over the years on just the threats posed by surveillance capitalism and addictive technology, and the use of addictive technology for manipulation through China's apt groups and also other state-sponsored hacking groups like those from Russia, like Sandworm and everything. As you know, they go on to social media platforms and they use the addictive technology for influence, propaganda, and so forth. Well, civil-military fusion is that exactly, but it takes it to a higher level now because it used to be just limited to the social media platforms, but apparently whether it's Palantir Technologies or militaries in Russia and China or intelligence agencies, they're getting access to a higher level of data to be able to conduct these surveillance and data mining operations while using behavioral data and the ability to track their targets that they're going after.
Where is that overlap between the commercial part and the civil military part? For instance, when you have an app and it says, click ask app not to track, does that block it?
No. Actually, I'm going to grab my smartphone here for a second and just kind of show you a quick just, as you know, your smartphone is full of apps, right? As we know, apps are no different than any malware. They allow the developer, whether they're from China or Russia, to monitor, track, and data mine the end user. Well, that's what a hacker does. They collect all your information off there, and they want to monitor and track you so they can exploit that for financial gain. It's the same thing. So when you get a targeted ad on your phone, when you're talking about tennis shoes, and you're with your friends, and then you go home and you see those ads fill your social media feeds and appear maybe in emails to you. Well, that's how it works. It works through ad tech. Have you ever seen, or with your experience, you've seen a little ad, then you see ad tech underneath it, and then you click on it, and it allows you, it says ad tech controls on there. Well, that's the ad tech server that sends you that ad. Now, how and why I think Russia and China have the same capabilities as Palantir is because through Google's ad tech platform, or their main core, there's an ecosystem of micro ad tech cores all over the country supporting over 35,000 advertisers, data brokers, and other entities connected or dependent on the targeted advertising industry. And I tracked ad tech cores to jurisdictions in China and Russia, which allows me to believe that if Palantir has mirrored this technology, then obviously the Chinese and Russians do, because that's how you get that ad. Many people tell me, I don't have Temu on my phone, but I got a Temu ad about something I was talking about. Well, you don't have to have Temu or TikTok on your phone, because that information that Google, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon collected on you gets uploaded into the ad tech core underneath what's called an identifiable digital DNA profile, which is like an avatar of yourself. It's a user profile, and all your personal information is collected in there. So when you're talking about tennis shoes with somebody, it kind of pops up along with the person that you're talking to, and then it goes out to what's called a real-time bidding platform, and then that goes out to all the ad tech cores in all of those countries, and then the advertisers actually bid, and the highest bidder gets to send you the targeted ads. So if you got one from Temu, but you didn't get one from Amazon, it means that they were outbid by Amazon, or they outbid Walmart or Target or anybody else that wanted to send you that same targeted ad to buy those tennis shoes from them. They just outbid them, which means that if it identified you, then that means Temu and those ad tech cores in China already have your information. And if they can mirror the same capabilities as Palantir Technologies, then that means they're getting the information either directly or indirectly from these ad tech cores to hunt people down.
In our next episode on Monday, we'll continue our interview with Rexley on potential solutions. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.